Right, so I'm just walking through the graveyard, and in previous videos we've done a little bit looking at the graves of people from the Sutton family. So it's the Sutton family that actually started all this community family tree that I've been building. Lots of people in Thorne are related to the Sutton family. I'm related to the Sutton family through the Hinchliffe family, and again the Hinchliffe family, another big family, lots of people related to them. Anyway, today's video is going to be about a Thorne legend, a cycling legend to be precise, and is a man by the name of Vic Sutton. So I actually saw, this is not a request, but I saw a guy post on one of the groups on Facebook. Does anybody know anything about Vic Sutton? You know, famous cyclist from Thorne. So I thought I would dig into it and yeah, do a little bit of research, tell you a little bit about the man called Vic Sutton. So his birth name was actually Herbert Victor Sutton. He was born 3rd of December 1935 right here in Thorne. His parents were Herbert Sutton and his mum was called Lily Wright. His grandfather was also called Herbert Sutton, so you've got he was called Herbert, that was his actual birth name, known as Vic. His dad and his grandfather also called Herbert. So his grandfather was in World War One. He was in the Royal Horse Artillery and unfortunately was killed in action in France in 1918. So he's there's a Commonwealth war grave over in France for that Herbert Sutton. So that Herbert Sutton, his grandfather married a lady called Eleanor Lawrence, and she was from a barge family that lived on barges, and it's through the Lawrence family they're related to the Hinchliffe family, intermarried to them, and obviously a lot of them lived on barges too. My great granny Sarah Ann Hinchliffe, she was one of that family as well. Anyway, so but this Herbert Sutton, his grandfather, is related. Once you go past him, you get into all the Suttons of Thorne. So if you are related to this Sutton family, you will definitely be related to Vic Sutton. Like I say, his grandfather is Herbert. There's a lot of other Herberts as well that some of you know, but they all do connect down the line. So that's a little bit of background on sort of his family and how he connects to the tree that we've looked at before. If you are connected, if you know that you're connected to Vic Sutton and you're connected to the Sutton family, get in touch with me, tell me how you connected, through who, and I will add you to the community family tree that I've built on Ancestry. And yeah, right, let's get into it. Who was Vic Sutton? Right, so Vic Sutton was a carpenter by trade. Like I say, he was born in Thorne 1935. But in 1958, Vic Sutton and a man named Tony Hewson, who was from Sheffield, and another man called John Andrews, who was from London, they got in an old wartime ambulance and they went to France. Okay, so this Tony Hewson, he was actually the 1955 winner of the Tour de Britain, and John Andrews was another cyclist who Tony had rode with in a lot of these big races. Now Vic he'd raced in Britain, but he'd not won anything big. He was kind of an average racer, if you like. He was the youngest of the three, and yeah, they all jumped in an old wartime ambulance and made the trip over to France. So this Tony Hewson, like I say, he was from Sheffield, and he'd seen an advert in a newspaper for old wartime ambulances that were in good condition, that were for sale in like a scrap dealer's in Chesterfield. So he did a bit of haggling, and he managed to purchase one of these old ambulances for 75 quid. So He got this old ambulance, he fixed it up. I think he did a little bit of work on the engine, the gearbox, and he got it running, and then he drove it to Thorne. So he came to Thorne because Vic Sutton was a carpenter, and he got Vic to, you know, rip out all the insides and make it into a bit of a motorhome. So Vic was responsible for making the internals of this ambulance into a living quarters. So yeah, Vic did that, and then they all jumped in the ambulance and they went over to France. So they're in France, they're living in this ambulance, you know, and they're training, they're cycling on the routes out there, up in the mountains. And many times there were mistakes, because they were just living at the side, literally lived at the side of the road in an old ambulance. They were mistaken for gypsies, living out there. And then eventually, through all their efforts, they got selected by a team. I think it was called Mercia BP, which must have been an old team back then, or an old like international sort of race league, if you like. So they actually ended up getting into this international league, if you like, and it's from there that they ended up racing in the Tour de France. So Vic Sutton, the carpenter from Thorne, you know, been in a few races, never won anything significant, ended up in 1959 racing in the Tour de France. So back then there weren't enough riders to make like an English team. So there was the 3 guys in the ambulance who were living in France, and then there was another English rider called Brian Robinson who joined them. And then I think there was like a Polish guy, an Austrian, and they made like a bit of an international team. So it was a 12-man team with 4 British riders. So when the Tour de France started, this is 1959, it was bad weather, it was raining, and there was riding, and Vic actually came off. He rid across some cobbles and he came off his bike, and yeah, took a few bumps and bruises, punctured his tyre. So he had a pretty rough time in the early stages of the Tour de France, and he ended up, you know, after that, you know, managed to rejoin the race, and when he rejoined the race, he was in 109th place when he rejoined the race. So yeah, it wasn't a great start. But this Brian Robinson, he was in one of the field had broken off into sort of different pockets of riders. So there's about 12 different pockets of riders, and Vic starts to move from one pocket to the next, and he's chasing, trying to get to the front. So this rider, Brian Robinson, he recalls, I read in an article, that he just looked at the side of him and Vic had come right from back in 109th place to the leading pack, and he'd come up to the side of Brian and said, you know, let's show these boys how to ride, which is a pretty cool moment that he's remembered. So yeah, he's gone from 109th place, and he's jumped from pack to pack, working his way to the leading group with some of the best riders in the world. And he said, you know, let's show these boys how we do it. He might have used some different words to that, but there you go. So the thing is with Vic, he wasn't known as a good sort of sprinter on the flat. Like I say, he'd done some races in Britain, but he'd never really won anything big. But he came into his own when he was on the mountains. He was a climber, and everything I've seen about him says that he was one of the best climbers in the world. If he'd only been better at the descent and the sprints, you know, he would have been right up there. But anyway, into the mountains, Vic starts ascending, and he works his way right to the front of the pack. I think one of the only riders in front of him was a guy called Charlie Gall, who, if you know about cycling, Charlie Gall is an absolute legend. And yeah, I believe he was from Luxembourg, and you know, he won multiple tours. You know, he was a legend. They actually called him, his nickname was the Angel of the Mountains. So he was a super good climber. You know, he was one of the best in the world. And here you've got Vic Sutton has made it, and he is right on his tail. So he was up there with the best of them. On the descent, he started to lose his place. Unfortunately, he wasn't good at descending as he was on climbing, and he ended up finishing the full tour in 37th place. But you know, highly respectable, and he earned the respect of all the riders just because of his ability on the mountains, his climbing ability. And I think that is, you know, in terms of his legacy in cycling, that is what he is remembered for, is that he was an absolute beast on the mountain. He was a true climber. He was a small guy, a pale small, you know, lightweight guy. But when it came to the mountains, he was up there, you know, with some of the best in the world. So after that Tour de France, he went on and he did the Tour de Suisse in the Swiss Alps, and he managed to get 5th place. That was his highest placing in these top international competitions. So a very respectable 5th place in a big international race for him there. Then he went on to the Tour de France of 1960, where unfortunately when he was in the Alps in one of the stages, he ended up having to go to hospital. He had some problems, and when he went to hospital they did some tests on him and said that he had a heart conditioning, and they said basically do not ever ride again. And that was the end of his pro cycling career. 1960 Tour, he didn't finish, and yes, he was retired from professional cycling back then. So you know, later in his life he always had a passion for cycling, and later in his life he would actually make a comeback. So in the 1990s he made a comeback, did some veterans races, and then unfortunately in 1999 during one of these veteran races his heart did unfortunately pack in, and he died doing what he loved, doing a sport that, you know, he was a legend in terms of what he'd done, climbing those mountains. You know, just a man from Thorne, a carpenter, living out there, living in France, in an ambulance, training, getting those opportunities and racing in the Tour de France. Like I say, eventually in a veterans race, his heart just giving out there. But like I say, dying doing the thing that he loved. Even though he was born in Thorne, he's not actually buried in Thorne. He's buried in Little Weighton, which is near Beverley. So he's buried out there. So yeah, much respect to him. Just thought I'd tell that little bit of a story about him being a legend on the mountains, chasing the legend that is Charlie Gall, the Luxembourg rider. And yeah, just a fun little story about him there. So if you are connected to Vic Sutton, please let me know. I can add you to his family tree, or to the community tree, sorry. And yeah, there's lots of other members of the Sutton family. Like I say, if you're connected to the Suttons and the Hinchlifes, and you know, you will be connected somewhere down the line to Mr. Vic Sutton. So yeah, may his legend continue. Hopefully this story, you know, brings his name back in the mix, because these people do get forgotten about over time. We forget about some of these legends. So local Thorne legend, Vic Sutton. And while I remember as well, we also have another top international rider from Thorne, and that is Mr. Connor Swift. He's a friend of mine, and he has rode in the Tour de France 3 times, I believe. And yeah, an absolute beast on the bike. So yeah, there's more legends to come out of this little village, but it's just nice to hear of one of the old ones. So hope you enjoyed that little story. And yeah, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, tell me if you're connected to Mr. Vic Sutton. I know on the original post, when the guy was asking about information about him, there was lots of people saying, you know, they're related to marriage or he's the cousin or whatever. So yeah, get in touch, and I'll add you to the family tree, and I will see you next time.